Orleans is a union town. New Orleans is a union town. New Orleans is a union town. New Orleans is a union town.
Hi there. I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like members of the Service Employees International Union, who you heard up top at a rally in New Orleans last week. We're going to spend most of this episode with them in Louisiana, where union members from across the country gathered to show solidarity with immigrants under threat of detention and deportation. Immigration enforcement has, of course, been at the center of national news since President Donald Trump took office for his second term in January. As we have discussed in previous episodes, the southern states are in many ways ground zero for those aggressive efforts. Conservative-dominated state governments across the South have been bending over backward to assist U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Border Patrol. The South is also where immigrants arrested from across the country are often sent because it has the largest concentration of ICE detention facilities. Texas holds the highest number of ICE detainees, about 12,600 as of mid-June, not surprising given both its size and its border with Mexico. Louisiana, which has 9 different ICE facilities, is number 2, at about 7,300 detainees. The two states together are holding about a third of all ICE detainees in the country. Of course, that balance could shift in the near future as Florida readies its so-called Alligator Alcatraz detention center in the Everglades. Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis toured the quickly slapped-together facility last week as Florida officials sold Alligator Alcatraz-branded merchandise and gloated about the possibility of escapees being eaten by predators in the marshes. Although designed only as temporary housing, it is supposed to hold up to 5,000 immigrant detainees, which would make it the largest single detention center in the United States and the largest prison of any kind. It will cost an estimated $450 million a year to operate. But paying for it won't be a problem under the massive spending and tax cut bill Congress approved last week. It includes an additional $45 billion for detention facilities, along with a dramatic increase in immigration enforcement funding overall. That bill was among the concerns on the minds and in the speeches of the union members who demonstrated outside Louisiana ICE facilities and in New Orleans' Lafayette Square last week. The SEIU is the second largest union in the United States with 2 million members. It organizes workers in 3 primary sectors: healthcare, including hospital and nursing home employees, government workers, and property services, including janitors, food service, and security guards. It has included immigrants since its founding in 1921, and it now counts more than 400,000 members not born in the United States. That's one reason it has been active in protesting the growing immigration crackdown. During an ICE operation in Los Angeles last month, David Huerta, the president of SEIU California, was arrested and charged with felony obstruction. Huerta, who is 58, allegedly shoved a police officer after the officer shoved him. He was injured in the resulting arrest and taken to the hospital. And last week, SEIU members from across the country rode buses to 2 of Louisiana's largest ICE detention centers for demonstrations outside the facilities in the height of summer heat. The project was called the Justice Journey, and buses along different routes made significant stops along the way. One caravan coming through Texas stopped in San Antonio to hold a vigil for a woman from Seattle, who is being detained by ICE there along with members of her family. Another bus working its way south from North Carolina stopped in Selma, Alabama, so members could walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where black civil rights marchers in 1965 were brutally beaten by white police. They also stopped at the home in Jackson, Mississippi, where civil rights leader Medgar Evers was assassinated by a white supremacist in 1963. The buses were headed for different destinations before eventually all meeting up in New Orleans. One group stopped on Monday, June 30th, at the Central Louisiana Ice Processing Center in Jena, Louisiana, a small town about 140 miles north of Baton Rouge. It was in the news most recently because it's where the Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil was held for 104 days after being seized by ICE agents in March. The other SEIU group stopped the same afternoon at the South Louisiana Ice Processing Center in Basile, about 170 miles northwest of New Orleans. This is a facility that holds only women detainees. It's where Tufts University student Rumeysa Ozturk was sent and held for 45 days after being snatched off the street by ICE agents in Massachusetts for co-authoring an op-ed article critical of Israel's war in Gaza. Both centers are privately owned prisons run by the GEO Group, based in Florida, the largest for-profit prison operator in the United States. GEO contributed $1 million ahead of last year's presidential election to MAGA Incorporated, the super PAC supporting Trump's campaign. Since Election Day last November, GEO's stock price has risen by 75%, driven by expectations of expansion as Trump's mass deportation program takes effect. After hearing about the Justice Journey, I decided to drive down to New Orleans and then meet up with the SEIU group at Basile. If you've driven through southern Louisiana between New Orleans and the Texas border, you know how remote and largely empty it is. Long stretches of wetlands and prairie punctuated by small towns and family farms. Basile is a town of about 1,200 residents, strung along two main roads on the border of Evangeline and Acadia parishes. It is in the heart of the region known as Acadiana, or more colloquially as Cajun country. This is where French-Canadian refugees called the Acadians settled in the 1700s, after being expelled, deported, from Canada by the British government during the French and Indian War. These Acadians were first shipped back to France, and then were recruited by the Spanish government to populate and farm its territory in what is now Louisiana. The Spanish were particularly looking for agricultural workers to grow crops and feed the growing urban center of New Orleans. Now some of the descendants of those deported and resettled farm workers are employed by the GEO Group, supervising the detention of a different group of immigrants facing their own expulsion. The Basile Detention Facility was first opened in 1993 by a different private prison company, LCS Correction Services, to house local, state, and federal inmates convicted of crimes. It has a capacity of 1,000 beds and was purchased in 2004 by Wackenhut, the company that became the GEO Group. As crime and incarceration rates fell through the subsequent decade, the demand for the facility dropped, and it was eventually idled. But then in 2019, during the first Trump administration, the federal government contracted with GEO to reopen it as an immigrant detention center. In a press release at the time, GEO officials estimated it would bring in about $25 million a year in revenues. There have been numerous complaints in recent years about conditions at the center. In a report on Louisiana's ICE facilities published last year by the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Center, the ACLU, and other civil rights groups, women who have been held at the center reported meager food rations that were often rotten or infested with pests, guards who yelled orders and made them sign papers in English that they couldn't understand, and despite the often soaring temperatures outside, the cells were kept at frigid levels so that inmates were always cold and uncomfortable, with only thin blankets to sleep under. One woman said in the report, quote, "I saw boxes of food that had cockroaches in them. The drinking water had a strong chemical smell. We saw snakes. It was scary to try to sleep and always find something crawling on the wall or on your mattress, spiders and different kinds of bugs." In court filings while she was held there, Rumeysa Ozturk also described abusive conditions. She wrote, quote, "We are in a cell that has a sign stating capacity for 14, but there are 24 of us in this small space. None of us are able to sleep through the night. They come into the cell often and walk around triggering the fluorescent lights. They shout in the cell to wake up those who work in the kitchen around 3:30 a.m. each day." Arriving at Basile after following my GPS through a long series of turns on rural highways off of Interstate 10, I found a small town with few signs of prosperity. There are a couple of gas stations and 3 national retailers, Dollar Tree, Family Dollar, and Dollar General. Although the detention center is on one of the town's two main streets, it was unexpectedly difficult to reach. A long train of oil tanker cars was parked, unmoving, on tracks that ran most of the length of the main street, effectively cutting off direct access to the site. I had to drive nearly to the end of town and loop around on a side road to get there. Nobody I found knew anything about whether the train had been parked there deliberately or just happened to be there that day. On approaching the center along Bragg Street, I found the road blocked by an Evangeline Sheriff's Department SUV. A deputy standing in the road explained that it had been closed to accommodate the planned demonstration. He allowed me to pass and directed me to park at the side of the street. There were other media representatives there from Louisiana outlets in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Lafayette. There were also several more sheriff's vehicles and a contingent of a dozen or so armed officers to keep an eye on things. The center itself was not much to see, a long, gray, single-story building with few windows, behind an imposing series of tall chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. Nobody was visible in the gravel yard in front. We milled around sweating in the hot midday sun as the buses carrying SEIU members arrived. We were cautioned by both law enforcement and union representatives that the permit for the demonstration allowed use of the roadway only, and both demonstrators and media must remain on the two-lane tarmac. If we stepped off in the direction of the detention center, we would be trespassing on GEO's property. On the opposite side of the street was an idle industrial property, the owner of which had made it known he wanted not even one footstep by the group on his land. That restriction apparently didn't apply to the sheriff's office. One deputy stood on that side of the street, operating a drone that flew above the gathering crowd. A group of what appeared to be a couple hundred people disembarked from the travel coaches, many wearing clothing with the purple and yellow colors of the SEIU logo. They mustered into a rough line and marched the short distance to face the entrance to the detention center, chanting as they came.
Immigrants are welcome here, no hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome here, no hate, no fear.
A short program of speakers, some of whom were hard to hear despite the use of a small portable sound system, made forceful pleas on behalf of the women being held inside, behind the barbed wire just a few dozen feet from where we stood. Sidi Pulchan, a Starbucks worker from Columbus, Ohio, who said her own mother was an immigrant, detailed some of the daily conditions endured by the center's detainees.
The women here are undergoing administrative proceedings to determine whether they'll be deported. But the conditions they face resemble those of criminal incarceration. Many immigrants have reported they're required to work for just $1 a day, cleaning or doing other tasks typically assigned to minimum wage workers. Guards at many of these facilities have also been accused of using solitary confinement as punishment, sometimes even when someone is in distress. It's been called a black hole, notorious for its human rights abuses.
Several attendees were holding up signs showing the face of a young woman and emblazoned with one word, Areli. Areli Westley is a New Orleans resident, an activist for immigrant and LGBTQ rights. She is a transgender woman born in Honduras who was brought to the U.S. as a child. Last year, she received the National Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award for her work fighting immigrant detention abuses with the Southeast Dignity Not Detention Coalition. The award was presented by Carrie Kennedy, the daughter of Robert F. Kennedy, and sister of RFK Jr., who is now Trump's Secretary of Health and Human Services. Areli Westley is now herself a detainee at the Bastille Processing Center, after being arrested by ICE agents in January. She had previously been removed from the country and then detained by ICE last year before being released under supervision orders. One of the speakers at the Bastille rally was Mitch Gonzalez, a transgender man and close friend and fellow activist of Wesley's. He said she is continuing her advocacy work from behind bars. He also described the insidiousness of the detention system, in which family and friends must send money to loved ones in order for them to pay to use a phone, effectively paying their corporate captors for the privilege of outside communication.
I talk to Areli every day. And how do we do that? Because we have to raise funds for her to do that. Every way that anyone inside one of these cages talks to someone on the outside is because of money. is because of money and access to a language that they can speak, which is very difficult. And Arely's lucky enough to be embedded in community because she's a human rights activist, very well known nationally. She won the RFK Center for Human Rights Award in 2024, and so we've been raising funds every day so that she can stay in touch with her family, and she's one of the lucky ones. And we raise funds for the other women inside too, because you have to pay for everything in there. They give you nothing, they take away everything, and you have to work to pay for what you get in there.
Well, how's it been for her in there? I can't imagine it's a great place.
It's been horrific. She's a trans woman, she's HIV positive, and on top of that, she was supposed to be screened for cancer before she got detained, and that screening has yet to take place. Cancer could be ravaging her body, and we have no idea. But she doesn't stop fighting because that's who she is. She fights for every single one of the women and LGBT people in there every day. She fights to get them funds for their commissary, funds for legal counsel. She trains them on their rights.
One of the demonstrators at Basile caught my eye because she was not part of the SEIU group. She walked up separately with a companion just before the demonstration started, carrying an American flag. I talked to her for a few minutes after the speakers ended. She was the Reverend Constance McIntosh, a Presbyterian minister from Welsh, Louisiana, about 30 miles southwest of Basile. Welsh is in the adjoining Jefferson Davis Parish, named in the early 20th century for the President of the Confederate States. McIntosh said she had been meaning to make a visit to the Basile Ice Center just to see it for herself, and by coincidence had stopped by the day before the demonstration. A guard shooed her away, assuming she was a day early for the permitted protest, and inadvertently telling her about it in the process. So she returned the next day and stood and chanted and cheered with the SEIU members. She said she was happy to see their presence in such a remote location.
For me, it gives me hope. I mean, I'm not sitting at home just agonizing and having my heart break and sobbing. I love it that we're not the only people that know this is out here. And the young women, they were in the windows waving. You couldn't really see them, but you could see the hands moving. I know even if they didn't get in the window, the other women, they're going to be talking about that tonight as they get out on the patio. We saw them yesterday, and I started shouting to them, blessings, and right after that, they all got ushered in. So I felt bad about that.
But so you think just to let them know that they're not forgotten, that people know they're here.
Forgotten. They have to know that they're not forgotten. That we've noticed something evil has happened to them. God bless them.
As I finished talking to McIntosh, some SEIU representatives came by with some urgency and let us all know that everyone was required to be back in their cars and on the road by 2 p.m. I hustled back to the media parking area along with a few other straggling reporters. The SEIU members boarded their buses and continued on toward New Orleans. They were scheduled to spend the next day there doing training for organizing that they could take back with them to their respective local unions. Their justice journey culminated the following evening in Lafayette Square, in the heart of New Orleans' business district. It was just a few blocks from the hotel where the training took place, and around 5:30 p.m., hundreds of union members marched through the city streets to the square, accompanied, as parades in New Orleans always are, by a jubilant brass band. They gathered in the square in the heat of the slowly sinking but still blazing sun for a rally that summed up much of what they had seen, done, and heard over the course of the previous days. Among the office towers that adjoin the park is the Hale Boggs Federal Building, which houses the federal court for the Eastern District of Louisiana. Taking the lectern on a temporary stage that had been set up in the middle of the square, April Verrett, the national president of the SEIU and the first black woman to lead the union, urged her members to take the spirit of the journey home with them.
This justice journey, it began as an act of resistance, but it has become our declaration of power. We started by lifting up the stories of those who've been silenced, the detained, the deported, the disappeared. We stood outside detention centers, we listened to testimonies, we honored the legacy of resistance that runs through this American South. And this evening, we close this chapter together. But we don't close this chapter in despair. We close it in determination. Because every single day, there is another assault on our people, on our rights, on the very idea of freedom. Y'all, let's be clear. This isn't just chaos. It is a blueprint. It is white supremacy wrapped in law. It is corporate greed cloaked in contracts. It is fear marketed as public policy. They built a rule book, and every chapter in it is about keeping us poor, keeping us divided, and keeping us afraid. But we have made it clear on this journey, their rules, they end with us.
She was joined on stage by representatives from the ACLU, which has been at the forefront of legal challenges to the Trump administration since January. Anu Joshi, the ACLU's National Campaign Director for Immigration, highlighted some of that work.
For months, we've watched as this administration has snatched our people off the streets. It ain't right. They're arresting them, they're detaining them, and they're deporting them, separating families, zip-tying children. And we know this isn't right. They're sending active duty military to an American city. That ain't right. That ain't right. And just this morning, we watched as the U.S. Senate shamefully passed a bill that will supercharge the terror being inflicted by ICE on our communities. That ain't right. They want to cut $1 trillion from Medicaid. That ain't right. And spend $145 billion to inflict cruelty on our immigrant families, friends, and neighbors. That ain't right. And we know that too much of that money is going to be funneled into private, for-profit corporations that make their monies on the backs of black and brown people. But we're not just sitting on the sidelines. We're fighting back. Since Inauguration Day, the ACLU has filed over 100 lawsuits. And we are winning, and we are not slowing down. Don't slow down.
She was followed by the even more fiery Alana Combs, executive director of the ACLU of Louisiana. She tied the state's concentration of ICE detention centers to its long history of imprisoning people of color. Louisiana has the highest per capita incarceration rate in the United States, at 1,067 per every 100,000 people, according to the Prison Policy Initiative. If U.S. states were countries, Louisiana would have a higher incarceration rate than any country on the planet except for El Salvador. If you're wondering where other southern states sit, Mississippi and Arkansas are numbers 2 and 3, and Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, and Tennessee come in at 5, 6, 7, and 8. All are well above the United States national average of 614 people per 100,000 population, which itself ranks 4th among nations, behind only El Salvador, Cuba, and Rwanda. Combs noted the irony under the circumstances of the approaching 4th of July holiday, with its often repeated promises of freedom and dignity for all.
But I ask you, what does dignity and freedom mean to people incarcerated in cages and in chains? Say nothing! Nothing! What does freedom mean and liberty mean when workers whose labor is stolen sit in prisons and detention centers? Say nothing! Nothing! What does dignity mean when your very existence is criminalized because of your race, your story, or your status? Say nothing! Nothing! Here in Louisiana, we know this shit too well. And forgive me making an expletive, but I want y'all to feel this. We know it too well. We are the highest incarcerated state in the world. The highest incarcerated state in the world. We also are the second highest incarcerator of immigrant people in the world. That ain't right. And the same prison cells that lock up our mothers and fathers and sons and daughters and cousins and brothers are now the same cells that are holding our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Another attorney on the program, Homero Lopez, talked about the complicated logistics of providing legal services to ICE detainees in Louisiana. He works with ISLA, a New Orleans nonprofit that represents immigrants facing deportation. Lopez, himself the son of a migrant worker, emphasized that the remoteness of the detention centers is no accident.
What we do is we go to the detention centers, we take on people's cases. We don't discriminate based off how strong your case might be, what your likelihood of winning is, because we know that the system itself is the problem. Mm-hmm. It's not that somebody doesn't have a strong case. Yes. It's not that somebody can't make it here. It's not that somebody's not doing it the legal way, the right way. And those air quotes are very big for this conversation. It's the fact that the system itself is built in a way to screw people over and not let them win, not let them stay. And that's what they're trying to do. And so what we do at ISLA is we go, we represent folks. We provide them with the legal representation that they can have, and they can at least get a shot within this bullshit system that we're fighting against. Usually, when I come up into these situations, I have to bring the negative thing, the downer. I'm usually the one talking about how many people are detained, how difficult the work is, how difficult it is for folks in these detention centers. I don't want to talk about that today. Today, I want to talk about you guys. Because the reason that they have these detention centers the way they have them, in the locations they have them, is to separate people and isolate them. The reason they brought Mahmoud Khalil from New York City all the way down to Gina, Louisiana, far away, a person who advocated, a person who protested, had they locked him up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, there would have been protests outside of that place every single day. Gina, Louisiana, y'all know how far the drive is. But you made the drive. You went out there. You made it happen. When Rameisa Ulster finally got released, y'all were there to receive her. Mm-hmm. Y'all were there to tell her that she was welcome and that there was somewhere for her to come back home to. And so that is the excitement that exists in this current moment, is that y'all are all here, right? They're trying to separate us. They're weaponizing the system in a way that is trying to take people apart, to break people up, and to make a situation where people who followed the rules are now getting that taken away from them. People who did everything how they're supposed to, again, big quotes, are having it taken away from them. They are now being classified as criminals. They're being classified as people who don't belong. But we know they belong. They're our community, they belong, and we want them here, and we want them to stay, and that's what we're here to tell everybody.
The MC for the rally was Aisha Francis, a member of the Union of Southern Service Workers, which organizes across multiple industries in the South. She came along on the justice journey from Durham, North Carolina. After the rally drew to a close, I talked to her for a few minutes. First, I asked her to explain what the USSW is and does.
The Union of Southern Service Workers, we're a cross-sector union, which basically means if you work for McDonald's today and decide you want to go work for a clothing store tomorrow, you're still covered by our union. What we do is we advocate for people on their jobs. We advocate for our immigrant siblings, as you know. We do a lot of advocating for fighting for people on their jobs, let them know their rights. Where we live at in Durham, North Carolina, it is an at-will state, Jim Crow laws all over the place. But we let people know that just because these laws are in place, there are certain things that they just can't do to us, these employees. So we don't worry about supervisors and managers. We go after corporations. We do strikes. We do walkouts. We do demand letters to the corporate people.
Francis was among those who visited significant civil rights sites during the journey south. I asked her what that meant to her and what she would take home from all of it.
I've seen plenty of movies and things on my history, okay? But to, again, walk in their exact footsteps across that bridge, it is something that I'll never be able to just get over. This is something that I will get to share. I got videos, I got pictures, I got history, my own history, to tell my grandkids, to show my grandkids where you come from, to show my grandkids what the people before me had to go through. what we are going through for them. My hope and my prayer is that with each generation, this fight has gotten a little less brutal, a little easier, but it's the same fight nevertheless. My hope and my prayer is that one day we ain't going to have to fight for none of this stuff that we're fighting for. We're not going to have to fight for dignity and respect on our jobs. We're not going to have to, our immigrant sisters and brothers who are here to seek a better life, to come here, to come to the land of the free, that it be just that. To the thing, we don't want anything extraordinary. We just want an equal playing field. And my hope and my prayer is that I'm alive to see when it becomes an equal playing field, because I know that it will.
And so you talked about walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, visiting Medgar Evers' home. You're kind of moving through this geography of past struggles and injustices. I guess, how did that enrich or shape your sense of this fight, what you're here for today?
Oh my God, it made me want to fight so much harder. So much harder. It let me know that I can't give up. Who am I to give up? Who are any of us to give up?
Who are any of us to give up? It was a powerful and pointed question, especially standing there in the heart of New Orleans, a city that was for centuries a center of human trafficking and enslaved people, home to vicious acts of racist brutality and massive social inequalities. But it has also long been home to spirits of both resistance and joy in the face of oppression. It is where Homer Plessy, a shoemaker and social reformer, engaged in a planned act of civil disobedience in 1892 to challenge Louisiana's recently enacted segregation laws. He boarded a railway car in New Orleans designated for whites only and was arrested when he refused to move. His challenge was unsuccessful. The U.S. Supreme Court case that bears his name, Plessy v. Ferguson, affirmed the constitutionality of a legal racial caste system that would rule the southern states for the next 70 years. But that triumph of white supremacy did not end the fight for equality by black New Orleanians. The New Orleans branch of the NAACP was chartered in 1915, making it the oldest chapter of the organization south of Washington, D.C. It investigated complaints of racial discrimination in housing, healthcare, and police brutality. In 1950, it organized one of the first protests against segregated schools in the city. And throughout the decades of systemic oppression, New Orleans black citizens built on the city's complex cultural heritage to produce music, jazz, blues, R&B, funk, hip-hop, that would conquer the world even as its creators continued to struggle at home. Louisiana's black population has over the centuries been beaten, enslaved, and incarcerated by state and corporate powers, suffered disproportionately from hurricanes and other natural disasters, and borne the brunt of the state's ongoing pollution crisis. Like Alana Combs said, in Louisiana, they know this shit too well. And they were out there in the heat of the day anyway, calling it out again and again. Who are any of us to give up? And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. We'll talk to you soon.